been a couple weeks since we last talked about the interesting subject of divorce. Where should we pick up with that today? What's kind of like the next topic that you'd like to hit on?
So thank you, Scott.
Yeah.
So today I thought we could spend just a little bit of time talking about what to do during a divorce, and then what are some things we should be doing kind of post-divorce.
Okay.
But before I kind of get into my laundry list of things to do, I just want to take a moment and hit on that the concept of divorce, right? So the impact of what a divorce has, as I see it, it's kind of twofold, right? There's the emotional side of divorce,
Right.
and then there's the financial side of divorce.
Yep.
Our discussion today is going to be around the financial side of divorce.
Right.
But I want to stress the importance of the emotional side, right? So whether you're the person wanting the divorce or the person not wanting the divorce, whatever role you're playing, that emotional piece is critical. And you will hear me say this in most aspects of my life. You must take care of yourself first. So in regards to that emotional side, right, make sure that you're seeking support from family, from friends, from support groups, maybe even therapy. So that emotional side is absolutely critical. So I just want to stress that importance before we move on to the financial piece.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I mean, there's more to it than just, one aspect.
Right.
So yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So let's pivot then, and let's spend some time talking about the financial side.
Okay.
Okay?
Yep.
So when we think about, okay, what are things that we should be doing right away? Okay? So one of the first things, key point number one is we're going to want to gather all the financial documents.
Okay.
Okay? And there's a laundry list of them, right?
Sure.
So it could be bank statements, retirement accounts, tax returns, usually for the last, 3 years.
Yeah.
It could be mortgage statements, insurance statements, basically any other financial documents. Is there a prenuptial? And so we need to start with kind of that fact-finding piece, right?
Yep.
Oftentimes they call it disclosure, right?
Okay, sure.
We have to disclose what do we have? Now, what's interesting about what I just said with this laundry list, it sounds pretty easy, right?
Yeah.
You just go gather all these documents. But where the complexity with that comes today is, and Scott, you and I probably both remember this, the old-fashioned way of doing this is you would get a document in the mail, you would go to your file cabinet, you'd put it in the folder, and you'd close the drawer. That rarely exists today, right?
Sure.
Most of these documents...
Sharon, we're not that old.
Well, thank you, Scott. I appreciate that. But most of these documents, let's face it, we have opted for electronic delivery.
Right.
And so when you're working with your financial professional, you're working with your attorney, and they say, show me all these documents, oftentimes in a party of two, one knows where they are,
Right.
and the other one usually doesn't.
Yep.
And they have no idea how to even gather these documents. And oftentimes, if we're in divorce, not always, but there are times where we don't see eye to eye,
Sure.
and I'm not going to share my password with you.
Right.
So you're on your own to try to find these documents. And
Yeah.
that in and of itself can be very challenging. I mean, if you don't even know who prepares your tax returns, where do you even go for that?
Right.
So one thing, and this can be for all listeners today, know how to access your financial stuff.
Yeah.
If it's all electronic, know the logins, know the passwords, okay? But let's just say now, for the sake of our conversation, right, that you are able to go ahead and access, these documents.
Right. You can get to that information, but it takes a lot longer if you have that password. It's instantaneous. So sorry to interrupt, but I think even outside of divorce, that's important to mutually have that hand.
Scott, that's an absolutely fantastic point that you brought up. So again, whether you're going through divorce or not, both parties should know how to and where to access these documents.
Right.
But let's face it, right? Life is, he or she will
Right.
do it, so I don't have to kind of know that. I
Right.
mean, that's the reality of what happens
Yep.
until, like you said, death, divorce, and now the other party is truly clueless
Right.
as to where do I even go for these documents. So
Yep.
I think that's just a fantastic practice management step, period,
Mm-hmm.
to know where to get these documents and, more importantly, how to access them. What are the passwords?
For sure.
Create your own password. You don't have to have the same password as your spouse.
Right. Right.
So once you've kind of gathered all those documents, then we should start to think again, what are the assets? What are the liabilities that we have? Now, when I say what are the assets, right, I want to just go off and just talk about what's marital property and what's separate property.
Okay.
Because, right, the two
Yeah.
are different.
Right.
And many people don't know the difference.
And I don't know the legality of all that stuff. Does it then become, communal property, or, it gets confusing,
It
even for
does.
me, right?
It does.
So yeah.
Yeah, and you're right, because you have stuff, she has stuff, you bring your stuff together, and now it's all commingled.
Right.
And oftentimes, and I'm certainly no attorney, so please seek legal advice, but I can speak broadly by saying, typically when you commingle those assets with, assets of your spouse, that becomes marital property.
Right.
And where we see people that start to get a little prickly on this is they have inherited assets. And they've taken those inherited assets and they've maybe put them into a joint account.
Right.
Once you do that, it kind of loses that situs, where now it's separate.
Sure.
And so I always give advice to our clients to say, hey, if you inherit assets, right, we can have this frank conversation. As your advisor, as a fiduciary, I am obligated to you to let you know if you commingle these assets,
Right.
they could become marital property.
Yep.
The other thing that we want to think about when we think about our assets, what's the valuation? Now,
Right.
there are things that you can go to, Blue Book value, things like that, to kind of help give us guidance. But there are some assets, businesses,
Sure.
right? It's not uncommon for a business owner, right, to maybe not have a valuation done, from 5 years ago.
Sure. Yeah.
Or maybe they've never had one done.
And what would dictate old?
I would say probably within a few years.
Okay.
But it also depends on the kind of business too,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
So
yeah.
if that business
Economically
has
sensitive, or
exactly.
Okay.
And if you've seen, oh my gosh, this business has, the growth has doubled in 2 years.
Right.
Definitely a valuation from 5 years ago just
Yep.
wouldn't make sense. So valuation of assets is key. And another good kind of practical, business sense tip might be, hey, even if I'm not going through a divorce, it might be a good idea just to, from time to time, just keep a file that shows, hey, these are all of my assets, and these are, kind of anticipated, valuation or, values of certain assets.
Right. I think what kind of falls into that, and correct me if I'm wrong, things like artwork, collectibles. I know that during COVID, a lot of valuable watches doubled and tripled in
Yeah.
value, and could have been a gift from your spouse, and all of a sudden that's I believe that's communal property, whatever the case is. I mean, that has to be looked at as something of value that that has to go someplace.
Yeah.
But yeah, the list probably goes on and on.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And you just brought up another good point, and that is community property.
Mm-hmm.
So again, as we're going through the process of divorce, you have to follow state laws.
Right.
Right? Minnesota
Yep.
is different, let's say, from Wisconsin. Wisconsin is a community property state.
Okay.
So it's important to make sure that, again, when you're working with a financial professional or your attorney,
Yep.
that they're well versed in the laws of those states. Another thing that can also be different when it comes to those state laws is when it comes to spousal support
Sure.
or potentially child support if you
Okay.
still have young children.
Yep.
Right? So it's critical, again, that you become well versed as to what are the rules, what are the laws of your particular state as it applies to those items.
Okay.
Another thing too, and I mentioned it earlier, is do you have a prenuptial agreement?
Right. What are your
Okay.
thoughts about that?
Okay,
That
now.
sounds, yeah, it's,
Now let's talk about that.
Right.
So again, right, this podcast can be for all, not just if you're going through a divorce,
Yeah.
because there are a lot of tips that hopefully we can share
Mm-hmm.
that let's just make good practice management.
Sure.
And one of those is a prenuptial agreement.
Yep.
And obviously, you hear about this a lot with the big celebrities and stuff, but I think that can be good for all parties.
Sure.
And so if you're asking me what do I think about a prenuptial, I am married and I have one.
Okay.
And I think, again, if you have that open and frank discussion about that, it shouldn't be this ugly, we're going to end in divorce kind of a conversation.
Right.
It's hey, let's be smart about this. Let's take that emotional piece out.
Mm-hmm.
And let's just put that kind of that financial piece in for a moment. And that's why when you're working with a professional, let the professional guide that conversation.
Sure.
So you don't have to.
Takes the emotion out of it.
Completely does.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think if you were to get a prenuptial, it does help with a lot of the stuff that we're talking about.
Okay.
Particularly, Scott, when you had shared last time that you are divorced and remarried, right? So you're coming into this with stuff.
Yep.
She's coming into this with stuff, right? This is a marriage a little bit later in life, right?
Correct.
We're not in our 20s and 30s, so
Yep.
we're all coming with stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so a prenuptial works fantastic to say, hey, whatever your 401k is, as of the date, this particular date of marriage, that's going to be preserved.
Yep.
Or whatever assets I come with, and we actually write them out. These are all of your assets, whatever your assets are, and we agree that these should we part, these assets are ours,
Okay.
and then whatever we bring jointly, then we will try to
Yep.
work that out.
Yeah.
And I think the beauty of a prenuptial is you can really craft it any way that you want, as
Sure.
long as both parties knowingly and willingly agree to this.
Yep.
Right? Because the same is true with a divorce, right? It doesn't have to be 50-50. What has to be is that we are mutually agreeing that this is how we're going to separate our assets.
Yep.
It's always preferred, like you had talked about last time, how yours was very straightforward, very more agreeable.
Yeah.
But that's not always the case.
Right.
But what does matter is if parties can continue to have that dialogue
Yep.
and agree themselves versus having a court
Yeah.
decide.
You're right. I mean, there were several factors, not to be, personal again, but there were several factors where it wasn't just 50-50. There was kind of a tilt towards one direction on her end and my end just because it was made up elsewhere with other, marital assets or, duration of support, things of that nature. So you're right. It's not just cut and dry, and, especially if it's not litigated and decided by a judge.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah. Cool.
Other things I want you to think about during a divorce is protecting your credit.
Right. It's a
Okay.
really good point.
So another thing that is very common, we
Yeah.
all do it, we have joint accounts,
Right.
right?
Yep.
And what you will want to think about is, hey, with a divorce pending,
Mm-hmm.
should we maybe possibly just agree to freeze that account?
Yep.
No party can withdraw from it.
Right.
But then we go ahead and open up our own account.
Makes sense.
So I'll open mine, you open yours,
Yep.
and we will now start depositing our own checks, our own withdrawals. But you really want to protect your credit.
Sure.
And where individuals can run into trouble is where, let's say, we're joint on an account. Let's say, for example, a credit card.
Yeah.
And I've been the one paying the credit card, and now I stop,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
You may not even know that I stopped paying it, but I did.
Yep.
Because why should I pay your expenses, right?
Sure.
And what could happen if this goes for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, several months, what's it going to do?
Hit your credit report.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. And we all know that once you get some of those dings on your credit report,
It takes a long time.
it does.
Yeah.
It
It's
really
crazy.
does.
Yeah.
And so what I would recommend, and again, this goes for all listeners,
Yeah.
is you can still receive a free credit report from the 3 U.S. From the major U.S. credit reporting agencies.
Yep.
Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion.
Right.
So what you should do is every 4 months, right? Because you can receive one report per year from each of the 3.
Right.
Is every 4 months, just go run one.
Yep.
And what's fantastic about that is you can then see all the open credit
Yeah.
that you have in your name.
Right.
Because I have had clients come to me and say, oh my gosh, I'm joined on this account and I had no knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you don't know, start there first. Run that credit report, which is different from a credit score,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
But run that credit report right away.
Yep.
Find out what open credit do you have. I think that will help with your collection of all the documents
Exactly.
that you'll need to gather. But then monitor that every 4 months. Just go out there and just run another report.
Right. If your credit is frozen, you're alerted to the fact that somebody is trying to obtain a line of credit with your name attached to it. So I just think, I'm super protective of mine, and I think that's just another great free feature that you can kind of act upon.
And I do want to just maybe take a moment and talk about a credit freeze.
Yeah.
Because I also have my credit frozen.
Okay.
And I will tell most everyone if they ask me, hey, should I freeze my credit or not?
Yep.
My answer is pretty much always going to be yes.
Yeah.
A lot of times in divorce, again, where I see differences is maybe one person may have a lot of the credit in their name and the other does not.
Right.
And then once the divorce occurs and the one that does not, right, they may have a low credit score, not because they're not good at paying their bills,
Sure.
but simply because they don't have a long enough history.
Right. Yep.
And that, believe it or not, can be harmful as well.
Yeah.
And so then we're looking at, hey, we probably should take out a card and make sure that we're using it
Sure.
and paying it off to help build that credit.
Right. Spend $250 a month, pay it off immediately. Just continually do that, for instance. Something like as benign as that. Right?
Exactly.
Don't go out and buy a brand new boat and get into trouble. But yeah, no, that makes sense too.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Okay.
Great information.
Yeah. Other things to think about, again, as you're going through this process, is now starting to create your own financial plan.
Yeah.
Right?
Really important.
So with that, you can think about, okay, well, what does that mean, right? Step number 1, we want to think about what short-term goals do we have, what long-term goals do we have.
Okay.
Because oftentimes during that divorce process, right, we're kind of pulling apart what was this into 2, and now we're having to rebuild.
Yep.
And so it's important that maybe what your financial plan was before probably isn't going to look anything like what it's going to look like now.
Sure.
So we need to start thinking about short-term, long-term goals.
Okay.
We also should think about an emergency fund, right? Because another thing is when you think about what's one of the largest assets a married couple has, it's their home.
Right.
Many times, neither party ends up keeping or retaining the home.
Right.
One may for a while and then eventually end up selling it.
Sure.
But usually that home usually ends up being sold within the first couple of years of that divorce.
Okay. Interesting.
And so when you think about, having an emergency fund, creating a budget,
Yep.
right?
Right.
Because again, what does that look like now for me? Because what was we is now me.
Right.
Very different. And so I would put out to our listeners that this can be challenging to work through a budget, to figure out how much should I set aside for short term, for long term, for emergency. How do I start that?
Yeah.
And so I would strongly encourage individuals, seek help, right? Ask, get with a financial advisor that can help you walk through a lot of these steps. But it's going to take some thought, right? Because where am I going to live?
Right.
If I'm not living in this home, in this geographical area, where am I going to move? What does that look like? And then all those bills, just the monthly, non-discretionary bills, whether it's, phone and you know, garbage and heating and all those bills that kind of go with that. So having someone to help walk you through all of those, I think would be really key.
To just state the obvious, this is what you do, right? All of this is what you do when you're working with folks that are going through divorce.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's not, it can be very scary.
Yeah.
You know, many times when clients come to me, they don't know what to do.
Okay.
They don't know where to start.
Yeah.
And so that's where I had said in the beginning with the two pieces, there's the emotional piece, the financial piece.
Yep.
And you said the two are actually intertwined.
Sure.
I do agree with that because there becomes fear about I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go and I don't know how to start. And then I have a piece of paper put in front of me that asks me to sign to this agreement. And so I would just, you know, encourage anyone listening to say, it's okay to do a timeout and say, let me get with someone that can help walk me through a lot of this. Because what we're talking about today can have long-lasting financial impacts.
For sure.
For years to come.
Yep.
So I think we've kind of covered kind of a lot of steps about what to do during. Okay.
Yep.
Things to gather, things to think about. But what about that post-divorce financial planning?
Right.
So
it doesn't stop when you get divorced, right?
It does not.
Yeah.
It does not.
Right,
Key
right.
number one, and you will hear me say this all the time, the most important thing that I can tell you with post-divorce planning is you must update your documents.
Okay.
Right? So, okay, what do I mean by that? What documents am I talking about? I'm talking about all of them.
Sure.
All of them. So let me give you some examples.
Okay.
It could be estate planning documents, right?
Yep.
Healthcare directive, power of attorney,
Sure.
will, trust agreements. So it could be any or all of those, right? It could be beneficiary designations. And I'll say this over and over again. We unfortunately have had clients come to us, not clients that I'm currently working with, but clients that have come to us that went through a divorce and then somehow along the line there was some kind of a death along the way. And I'm hearing stories or visiting with individuals where assets that maybe should have come to them went to someone else, and that being the former spouse.
Okay.
And again, when you talk about maybe even a second marriage, right? Where for some reason individuals just assume, well, I'm remarried, so it has to be my spouse on file. But until you verify with that employer, right, we don't assume.
Like your 401k, right? I mean, it's like you overlook that stuff.
It happens, Scott. It just does.
Sure.
And it's never done maliciously, but then the surface when somebody dies, that current spouse thinks, okay, I'm now the beneficiary, only to find out it's the former spouse.
Maybe not done on purpose, right? Like you said, it's just overlooked.
So we want to make sure that we are looking through all and anything that has any kind of a beneficiary designation, even bank accounts, right? Bank accounts, oftentimes we add a payable on death. What's interesting with that is when you receive your bank statement, it never shows that.
It doesn't.
It never shows at the bank who your payable on death is, or even if you have one. You actually have to call and ask or go there in person and ask, do I have someone on file? Those things are very commonly forgotten about. So we want to update the financial documents. Again, retirement accounts, we want to not only update the beneficiaries and the titling, but we also want to, when it comes to retirement accounts, we also want to ask ourselves, hey, maybe I have received, as part of the divorce settlement, I've received, let's say, your IRA, for example. Does that allocation match how I would allocate that? Meaning, maybe your spouse was the one that kind of had more control and maybe had that account very aggressively invested. I may not want that level of market participation. I may want something different. So it's not just enough to get the titling in my name. It's now let's take it to the next step and say, okay, what's in the account? What does it look like? Does it match, my lifestyle and my risk tolerance?
Sure.
And so again, whether it's, things like, again, retirement accounts, brokerage accounts, different trust accounts, anything that has any kind of financial value to it,
Yep.
we want to make sure we're checking owner, beneficiary, and what is the purpose of that?
Sure.
If it were life insurance and I'm no longer married, do I need to have life insurance?
Right.
So all of these things really need to be looked at. And then lastly, we kind of want to think about, what about setting, again, new financial goals?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So once the dust kind of settles and we know, hey, maybe I'm not in that marital home anymore.
Yep.
Maybe I want to buy a home of my own, something new and something different. Okay, what does my budget look like?
Yeah.
mean, what does my job look like?
Sure.
What expenses do I have? What income do I have? Do I have, again, spousal support coming in for 4 years and then it turns off? Do I have young children still in the home?
Right.
Like what does all of this look like?
Yeah. How are you planning for retirement?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because again, when you take a pool of dollars, again, because I'm talking about the financial piece,
Sure.
maybe you cut them in half. Maybe, I don't know, right? But now you cut them in half and say you get half, maybe, right? But is that enough? Is that enough for how I envision my retirement? And now, what does my plan look like?
Exactly.
So, I think if we start to just take our time, work through this, know that these things don't happen overnight. But I also think I'm a huge proponent of education, right?
Yep.
I really think knowledge is a very powerful tool. And when you think about your new financial independence, right? That's what I want to call this is new financial independence. Take time to learn about budgeting, about investing, about what do you own? How does it work? And some people may say, I don't really want to know. That's okay. That's okay. That's why Vector is here.
Sure.
To help partner with you.
Yeah.
To educate you to the level that you want to be at.
Right.
Right? I would always ask our clients, I want you to be aware of what you have.
Yep.
You don't have to know every intricacy about everything, because that's what Vector is there to serve in that capacity. But I think it really helps you retain and gain financial control of your financial future.
I think we help with the heavy lifting, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to that. I mean, this whole process before, during, and after.
It's okay to seek support
100%.
from others, right?
Really important.
Because there's the stage of I'm about to enter a divorce. I've just been told that my partner wants a divorce. So there's all of that. Then there's during the divorce all that stuff that we have to go through and finalize and settle and agree upon. And then there's the post-divorce where it's like, okay, it's done. The dust is settling.
Right.
But maybe that emotional piece kind of comes back again. So just know that, again, seek support. And I just can't reiterate this enough, from family, friends, support groups, sharing your experience with others. You shared your experience with us on the last podcast. And I think there's a lot to be gained from sharing your experience and hearing experiences from others.
Yeah.
And I know that while divorce is a significant life event,
Yep.
it is also a chance to rebuild and redefine your financial future.
Yeah.
But this time it's on your terms.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think if we can just accept that and kind of move forward with that, knowing that, hey, I'm going to ask for support where and when I need it. I think that will hopefully help our listeners today navigate this.
Awesome. This has been great. I mean, like you said, cathartic in some ways. If there's folks out there that have heard this, are listening, watching, if it doesn't apply to you, but it might apply to another family member, somebody within your network, forward this on, right? Or contact us or pass our contact information on. We're happy to speak with them. We don't charge anything to have these initial conversations. We really don't charge anything until they actually onboard as a client. We're here and happy to help at any point in time. But thanks, Sharon. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Scott.
Yeah, thanks.
Hey, thanks for listening to our podcast. Information presented is for educational purposes only and does not intend to make an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies. Be sure to consult first with a qualified financial advisor and/or a tax professional before implementing any investment strategy.